Welcome to the Catbird Quilts. I'm Kathy Martin. And when you work with men's dress shirts and quilting, you get your eye on a quilt pattern. Sometimes you think, will this work for shirts? And that's what I'm going to talk about today. And of course, I have a lot to say about it. So I've been thinking a lot about using men's dress shirts, men's shirts for quilting. Well, I think about that all the time, really. And one of the things that's challenging about using men's dress shirts is because it's not yardage, you have to think about how you're going to use your pieces, how you're going to cut your fabric, and how to view the whole shirt overall. Can I get this number of pieces out of this shirt? Which really requires you to be maybe clever or cleverer than you would if you go to the local quilt store and get a yard and a half of fabric. If you butcher it, it's okay. You can just use more of that yardage or go get some more. And I've said it before and I'll say it again. When you have a shirt, that's all you've got. And for you memory shirt quilt makers, it's even more so because this is not just some random person's shirt. This is either a shirt of a loved one or a shirt of someone else's loved one that you're making a quilt for. So you really have to, clever girl it and figure out how to get the pieces that you need to out of that shirt. So sometimes when you're reviewing a pattern, there's a question. There really is a question like, can I get these pieces? And in fact, even when you're reading through a pattern, a lot of times you have to back yourself into it. Like they're written for yardage. So the patterns often say 8 2.5-inch strips with the fabric subcut to blah, 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 blah. And for those of us that don't use yardage, or at least not substantially use yardage, a lot of times you have to get to the very end and figure out what you need for the block or strip and kind of back yourself into it. And so there's sometimes a little more work using shirt fabrics than there is just for straight yardage. Okay, how do you do that? And when would you do that? And just as an aside, every time there's a call for pattern testers, I really kind of get excited and secretly, like not so secretly, go, oh, I would love to pattern test quilts, as if I had the time. But I have that desire, like, oh, that would be fun. But when I'm in my own quilting experience, if someone said, well, just make a practice block. I don't want to make a practice. I don't want to practice. And for those of us that were raised and trained to play a musical instrument, or if you were in athletics, that is part of it. You just have to practice. There is no, I don't practice. You practice. And practice has a real negative connotation. And I talked about actually practice blocks in a previous video. I was making what I call the fall quilt. And it actually had several things. And I ended up making a practice block. When you have those questions, will this work? Instead of thinking of it like, well, I don't know, let me just try, or, I better not because it might not work. Better is to approach it like you're pattern testing, because that's what you're doing. You're pattern testing. You don't have to make a practice block. You don't even have to think about it like practice. You can think about it like, I'm getting to pattern test and see what this is about. So that's where we're going. So this quilt I have before you has been behind me on a couple of different videos. It is called the Copaway. I hope I'm saying that properly. It is a quilt pattern by Cotton and Joy, and it's a design based on a Chilean flower, which that whole story is great. And she's awesome. So Copaway, Cotton and Joy, super fantastic. Not what this video is about. It has curved seams in it. So it has this, and there's a bunch of them. And this is just one part of it. When I was making a baby quilt for a friend, and if you saw that, it was the Celtic crossing quilt. I was really torn between two patterns. There was the Celtic crossing and there was this one, the cup away. I wasn't even sure I could do a curved seam. I just had never done it before. It was a completely new technique for me. And so I just thought, well, I'll just try it. And so I did. And I just made this tiny little piece of this block. So just that one curved seam. And as luck would have it, luck favors the prepared. It actually came out beautiful on the first go, which thank God, or otherwise I might not have ever approached it again. But it came out great. And I thought, oh, that's really cool. And so I had already cut the one piece. So I cut the second piece. Then I had two of those pieces. Like, okay, I can do this. I probably need some practice, but I can do it. And then I went on to make the other quilt. And then I had some of this block made. And so I just kind of dug in. I was like, well, I've cut the fabric and I've done two of the curved seams. I may as well go on and do the whole block. I mean, what's it going to hurt? So I did the whole block and loved it and just thought it was so pretty. And so then I made another block and so on and so on, and it ended up with this quilt. Now we are going to talk about this quilt in a future video. So fear not, I have more to say about it. The point being that I pattern tested for myself this block. And when I got done with the block and realized I liked it, even though I did not make this particular quilt for my friend, it was not a waste because I was able to check and see if it worked, check and see if I could do the technique, kind of refine the technique. And then I did end up liking it and went on to make a whole baby quilt out of it. So that's kind of point number one. Why would you pattern test for yourself? And it's if there's a new technique that you have not done before, best to do it on something that you're not married to, so that if it is more challenging or if it's just too tedious or it's something you don't want to spend your time and energy on, you learn before you've committed to all of your fabrics and all of your fabric cuts. And let's say you have this great idea and you cut all of your shirts into these pieces and then you hate doing it. Or maybe you're not great at it and you're going to have to really practice, and you don't want the janky ones to end up in the quilt that you have earmarked for your aunt. So, and that's not A-N-T for those of you that are not from the South. That's A-U-N-T. Like we have ants. Expired. So anyway, have y'all seen that commercial? Okay, I'm going to turn and talk to this space right here because my friend Jennifer is sitting right here in my kitchen. And her husband is with her, and they are very, very dear friends of ours. And so we literally have a studio audience today. And I have to tell you, it is requiring all of my internal self-will not to talk to them because they're smiling at me, and it's fans. We're fans of theirs. They're fans of ours, and our being not me and the mouse in my pocket, Paul and me. And so if I just accidentally go, and so it's because there are people sitting right here. Back to the matter at hand. That was the end of a parenthetical phrase. And we're back to the original parenthetical phrase, which is if you have a technique that you haven't tried before, it makes a lot of sense to try it on something, not the end result. And I'm terrible at this, by the way. I can do this. I'm the person that when you have to take a dish to potluck to church, I will try a completely new recipe that I have never done before and don't know if it's going to taste good or have the right texture or anything. Like people could hate it. I will not take the thing that I'm great at, that I know that people will fawn over. I will try a completely new recipe. So I do that with quilting too, but I'm really starting to learn the value. And if I can make that mental shift and think of it like pattern testing, then all of a sudden now this is not wasteful. This is not wasteful of time. This is not wasteful of energy. This is not wasteful of fabric. It's almost like an experiment, which brings me to the next point. So sometimes you want to do an experiment. And you might not know that you want to do an experiment, but you think to yourself, I wonder how those plaids will look in XYZ block. And it's fitting that Jennifer is sitting right here in my kitchen because this is the Jennifer that made the perfect block. Perfect block. And we did this together. And if you want to see that video, we made a video on that. All of these videos will be linked in the description below. So you can, if you think, oh, I never saw that fall quilt one, which I'll talk about that more, you can click on the link in the description below. Same thing with this one. I'm probably going to reference about 4 different videos because it's a lot. We wanted to see what these uneven plaids would look like if we fussy cut them and tried to make them perfect. And then in this one, it was just a kind of a free-for-all. How is this going to turn out? And we used 2 plaid shirts that I was really, in the mattress case, could not figure out how to use it in another project. And so it's beautiful. It is so beautiful, but it was just taking up space in my fabric stash. I had no plan for it. I loved it. I couldn't see a way forward with it in a quilt. And so it was a perfect candidate to audition. What will this look like if we fussy cut one? And we did a perfect and a not perfect, and then we did in this one, and then we did a perfect and a not perfect one in this one. Same with this purple plaid shirt. It's an uneven plaid, and we wanted to see if you really tried to match up all of those plaids in this design, how that would come together. But I had no plan for this purple shirt. So it's a really great time to take a shirt that you love, but you don't have a plan for it, or you don't see how you could use it in another project, or you've tried it and it hasn't worked with something else. That's a great way. So you can try a technique or a style and see. And then the beauty of that is if you end up with this gorgeousness, but you learn like, oh, okay, I'm going to do this, but I'm going to do it with all these other fabrics. This can become its own thing, which we'll talk about that probably in a whole other video, because God knows I have a lot to say about that too. It's a great way to use a shirt that you like, or even a shirt that you really don't like. And I think we all have had that happen, where you really like a thrifted shirt and you get it and it's 99 cents because it's half off day and it's been there for 12 weeks and you have a senior discount and you spend 50 cents on a shirt and you're like, well, I'm on the fence, or, oh, I really like it. And then you get it home and it works with nothing. That's a great shirt to use in your pattern testing because you're not losing anything. The only thing you lose is the time and energy spent making it. But what you gain is this going to work for me? And obviously these turned out fantastic. You might want to find out if you can do a technique. You might want to find out if, for example, if a plaid will work with this style of block. You might also have a question about the color or fabric choices that you have. So you've done a fabric pull and you really like it, but you're not sure it's going to work. And I referenced it earlier. I'm obviously going to re-reference it. I made a quilt, which we called the fall quilt, and it had 2 of those characteristics. I wasn't sure about the colorway. Well, I thought I was sure about the colorway. And then it had a partial seam in it, and I had never done a partial seam. And I read through the pattern and had some questions internally, which I didn't have internally. Anyone who would listen to me have my questions, I talked to them about it. But I just was like, well, I'm not going to commit to the whole thing. I'm just going to make a block and see what it looks like and see if I can even do this. And of course I could. It was a little rough. And then I made a second block and realized I did not like the colorway. I pattern tested for the technique, but I also pattern tested for the colorway and realized I don't like these fabrics together. And at that point, I was only in for really just a couple of strips of each shirt fabric. So I had not committed my entire shirt, if you will, to the project. I had only committed a couple of strips. And so I didn't feel like it was a loss. It was a gain because I realized I'm not going to like this if I proceed. And what a gift, because I didn't waste any. I'm doing a lot of air quoting. I didn't waste any fabric because I would have wasted it. And I did use some of those strips in the next blocks, and then I ended up reworking the whole colorway. So what I did, I reworked the colorway, saved those 2 blocks, quilted them, and made pillows out of them and gave them to my sister, and she loves them, and they match her living room perfectly. That's the kind of where I am with this. So there's the techniques you're testing, there's the color you're testing, there's the style of block that you're testing with your fabric. And then there's the kind of final, and where I'm going to show you some real stuff is, do I have enough shirt to carry this pattern? And a lot of you have commented, well, you could just piece it together. Like if you run out of the shirt, you can piece it with something else. And that is very true. And if you like a scrappy look, you can just make almost any pattern work. But if you really want to not have that kind of modeled, scrappy, pieced together look, if you want a real clean, minimalistic, simple style, you have to at some point consider, is my shirt gonna be enough fabric for this quilt pattern? And that might be for one block. It might be for the whole quilt. It might be for a repeating motif in your quilt. So the example I'm going to show you today is a 2-tone. I want to make this quilt as a 2-tone, and I just really wasn't sure if it was going to work. But in your quilt pattern testing, it might be, I want to do this block, but I want to have it repeated 4 times. Is my one shirt going to provide enough pieces for that to repeat 4 times in my quilt, which is the thing we were talking about yesterday? Or it might be, I'm going to use this big piece, and this big piece is going to repeat all throughout the whole quilt. Or in my case, which I'm about to get to, is can I do this as a 2-tone? Will I have enough fabric? And so that's where will it work? And sometimes you don't know unless you just pattern test your own quilts. So here we go. I did a video that we call the Wedding Quilt Project. And it really was just kind of me exploring fabrics and patterns, 2 of them. I kind of had narrowed it down to 2, and like, should I do this one? Should I do this one? And I just kind of talked on camera about my thought process. And I have really kind of been leaning toward this 2-tone one that I had envisioned with white linen and a tan linen. And I almost said hoarding, and that's probably because that's what it is. I've been collecting, I've been gathering linen for the sake of, can I get enough fabric to do this quilt? And someone wisely noticed and commented on that very video that I must really want to do the 2-tone one, because I was already problem solving in that video if I didn't have enough fabric, what I could do, which I thought was so insightful, by the way. And gosh, isn't that so true? When you find yourself trying to problem solve, if you run into problems in the future, that's probably the one you want to do. So lessons learned. So I bought the pattern, obviously, and I'd read it, I thought it through. And in the pattern, she says something along the lines of, if you sew a 1/2 inch on the other side of this flip and trim, you'll end up with enough half square triangles to make a throw size quilt. And I was like, oh, so initially my thought was, oh, that's cool. That's great. And it's just kind of an offhand statement in the pattern. And then I was going to do a test block. I just had committed to, let me just see if this is going to work, because linen can be kind of funny. It's especially depending on how heavy it is and how open the weave is. And there's a lot of on the bias on this one. And so I just had a doubt. I had a doubt. And I just could not bring myself to cut into my precious linen for the sake of a test block. Actually, that brings me to a kind of important point. For those of you that make memory quilts, either you have a family member that has passed and you have their shirts and you're wanting to make a memory quilt for yourself or someone else in your family, or you are a memory quilt maker, it is an honor and a burden to be given a lot of shirts and need to use them and use them wisely, because it's more than just you can't go get another one. This is someone's loved one, and it's precious to them. It represents that person. So you don't want to waste that fabric, and you want to treat it with respect and care, and you don't want to, I'm saying you don't want to, I'm projecting, but if it were me, I know that I would be, I started to say worried, and it's because that's the right word also. I would be worried that if I cut the shirt or cut it wrong or jumped in with both feet like I usually do, and then it didn't work, now what? So there's a little more pressure, a lot more pressure to use them wisely. And that's good and bad. And so again, clever girl, we have to be really choosy with how we use our fabrics. And in the case of linen, I value it so much because I just really do love the feel of linen and everything about it. P.S. Jennifer is totally tearing up right now, and I have that same heart. It's a precious thing. And so for those of you who do that or who are grieving and want to do something beautiful in memory of your loved ones, I get it. I really get it. So I got ready to cut into my linen to make a test block, and I couldn't do it. And the reason I couldn't do it is because I read the pattern and I was like, if I have enough half square triangles to make a throw size quilt, I'm squandering my linen. And then I'm like, well, but then I get this other thing out of it. And I was kind of back and forth. All right, I'm going long. I know what to do. Let me take a shirt that I do not care for now. It's long been paid for. It's been in my fabric stash for close to a year. And I'll take this white sheet that I bought for $2.99 at my most recent thrift haul, and I'll make a block. And I'll make a block with something that isn't a risk. And so Jennifer and her husband came to visit, and I had started cutting pieces, and Jennifer was keeping me company, and so she was pressing, I'm sewing, she's trimming and flipping and pressing, and I'm sewing, and we get this block. And it is such an interesting block. It is huge, huge. It is 24.5 inches. And so each of these square pieces are very large. And when I was cutting them out of the very large shirt that I can't stand, that was on my I always say cutting board, my cutting mat, I realized I can't get these big blocks. I can only get 2 of them out of the width of some of the pieces that I had. Now, when you use shirts, you're using sleeves and sometimes cuffs and sometimes collars, not so much collars, but lots of different parts of a shirt. Yoke, if you use small pieces, gosh, that shirt will go so far. It is really phenomenal. But when you have very large pieces, it's hard to get all the pieces out of them. And then there's a lot of waste around the outside. Actually, let me just show you. Hang on just a second. So here's a sleeve, and I just looked down and saw that it has the finest little piece of lint on it that you guys cannot see, and I can't stand it. So I'm going to get it. Okay. Back to our regularly scheduled programming. So those blocks, those squares in that block take up about this much space. And if I was just spot on, I might be able to get 4 of them out of the sleeve. This is a very large sleeve. I'm pretty sure the shirt was an extra large. And also, I'm pretty sure it was cotton poly. So I'm really so glad I'm using it because it has not held a crease at all. It's been so infuriating. So I might be able to get 4 of those squares, but probably not. And so what that means then is I get 1 here and 1 here, and the rest of this shirt is not usable for this pattern. And I might be able to get the smaller pieces out of this section. When I use the shirt back to cut the pieces for the big block, I had so many leftover pieces that could be used 1,000 ways, but not in this project. And what I got out of that shirt back, I used a shirt back and a shirt front, and I got 1 block out of it. In this quilt pattern, there are 9 blocks. And what that tells me is if I wanted to do this, I would need the equivalent of 9 shirts to do the darker color. Now, it alternates in the quilt pattern, so I might be able to stretch it. But if I was wanting to do two-tone, there's no way to do this quilt in two-tone unless I have every 9 shirts that are this color or very, very similar. So if I do the linen one, then I need to have the equivalent of 9 linen shirts that are the same color. You can imagine my hopes were dashed. I was surprised and disappointed. If I was willing to use a lot of varied linen colors, or if I was willing to do 1 sage and 1 tan and 1 yellow and 1 pink, then no problem. But that's not what I wanted to do. What I wanted to do was have nearly identical tan linen from block to block. And it doesn't work and I know that because I pattern tested. It reminds me of pattern testing and doing this. My mother was fearless, and she would decide at 4:45. Apparently, I've got food and pattern testing linked in my brain. She would try a new recipe at 4:45 for us to eat at 5:30, which meant no trip to the grocery store. So she would pull out a cookbook or recipe cards or whatever, and she she would look in the refrigerator and go, "Oh, I don't have enough eggs. Oh, well, that's all right. I've got mayonnaise." Or I can't even think of anything. I don't have black-eyed peas. That's all right. I don't need it anyway. And so she would throw together a meal using a recipe, there's the air quotes again, and not have the ingredients. Working with shirts is kind of like that. This is what you have. Can you make this work? It's a Tim Gunn moment. It's a make it work moment, except sometimes you can't make it work. And that's what I found with this block. So it's beautiful. I might make this in the future. I might make modifications so that I can make it work, so I can Tim Gunn it. But what I discovered was it felt like I was not using my fabric wisely. And because I can't get in the car and go to my local quilt store and buy, I could go buy white linen. I could go buy tan linen. But I'm really trying to be thrifty. And so I don't want to spend that kind of money. I'm also trying to be resourceful and use thrifted material because I think everything about it is good. It keeps it out of landfill. It's cheap. It's great fabric. There's kind of no downside in my view. So I don't know. There's something to it. So I also want to show you. So this is a block, which I've said 3 or 4 times. It is really lovely. It is so large that I would probably not make a throw pillow out of this. So that's another one of those things that you discover. Like if I had to do it again, I might alter the dimensions of the block to make it work. Or I might do different piecing to make it work. And in that vein, I want to show you why I'm feeling like maybe this was not a good use of my fabric. And so, BRB. So this that I have before me is the leftover half square triangles from that block. So that's from one block. And while it is really great to have a lot of half square triangles, I mean, I could make a throw pillow with this, trim them down, and all of a sudden now I have that would be probably trim it to 2.5-inch blocks. It'd be a 16 by 16 block, which is great for a throw pillow. So super great. But if I'm trying to conserve my linen, if you're trying to conserve your shirts for your memory quilt, this feels wasteful, honestly. Like if I'm just being honest, this feels wasteful. It feels like all of this fabric could have been used in a better way. The conclusion that I have arrived at in my pattern testing, not that anybody wants to know, is the block is too big, and the way the pattern is currently written, it doesn't seem like that's a wise use of my precious linen. And so now back to the drawing board, which is actually, yesterday it was frustrating. When I got the block made, it was frustrating because I really wanted it to work. Today it's hopeful because now I get to look at more quilt patterns to try to achieve what I want to achieve. Or I may get in there with my graph paper and my brain and rework the pattern to make it work. I might change the size. I might change the piecing style. I don't know. That's kind of an interesting thing. So the moral of the story, if there was one, is when we approach quilting with an eye on learning and an eye on testing and approaching it like, what if, rather than this is, then it opens up possibilities for, oh, this didn't work, and thank God I figured it out before I got halfway into a quilt that now I can't undo, or I could undo, but at great cost in time and energy. And I figured it out beforehand. Also, learned about myself in the process, learned about being a good steward of the fabric that I have purchased or been given. And so it's really kind of like a win. Even though the pattern doesn't work the way I thought it would, it's a win. I have a throw pillow out of it. I have a very large block that I learned a lot on. I have the challenge for myself to either find a new quilt pattern or rework the one that I've chosen. And all because I was willing to take the time to pattern test, which I want to do anyway. So I don't know. It's good food for thought. It's to bring the food metaphor back in. Read your recipe before you go to make it. Read your quilt pattern. Think about it. Be willing maybe to take some risk, but maybe don't risk on the precious stuff. Risk on the stuff that it's okay if this shirt didn't work. And then you have lots of answers on the other side of it. And probably, I feel like I'm a better quilter after this learning experience. I feel like I'm a better quilter after pattern testing. That's all I have to say about that. No, it's not. No, it's not. Oh my goodness. I'm Kathy Martin. This is the Catbird Quilts. Thanks so much for watching. Oh, I was going to say the thing. I might redo that. I never know what I'm going to say in this part. From the top? Sure. Not at all. Because it's like, you know, do you want to go to Wendy's for dinner? Sure.
Mm-hmm. Like a colonoscopy?
Sure. Sure. Welcome to the Catbird Quilts. I'm Kathy Martin. I don't want to say today. I say today a lot. And so that's why I'm trying to get away from it. It is today. Okay.
The Catbird Quilts. Tomorrow we're talking.
Tomorrow.
Go back tomorrow.
2 days 2 days from now, which is the reality. Oh my goodness. No, it's great. It's great. I'm just messing. I do this every time. I'll do 6 of these before. Yeah, this is absolutely a typical experience. And I can't ever figure out exactly what I want to say until it just rolls out of my mouth. And then sometimes it's like, well, that's good enough. And so this is part of the deal. And boy, am I glad I did. And boy, am I glad I did. Gosh, that was hard. So I did a video that we called the wet